At 4:47 a.m., Malachi stood barefoot in the hallway, holding his breath so the floorboards would not betray him. From the crack in the bedroom door, he heard his wife laugh and say, "Relax, I've got my personal ATM wrapped around my finger." The word ATM did not echo, it sank. There was a small pause, then her voice again, light and sharp. "He thinks he's saving me. He's just paying for my bad choices." He did not crash into the room. He did not shout or ask who she was talking to. He just stared at the dent on the wall from where he'd stumbled into it last month after a 20-hour stretch, and finally understood it meant more to him than he meant to her. If this already hits something deep inside you, true hearts, don't just sit there and swallow that feeling. Tap like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes in the comments if you've ever given everything to someone who quietly treated you like a resource, not a person. This story is not just for watching, it's for every sacrifice that was taken for granted. Malachi was 34, but stress had pushed him into a face that looked a decade older. He was tall, broad, the kind of man people assumed could handle anything. His brown eyes carried faint purple shadows from nights that never really ended. His beard grew in rough because he kept forgetting to trim it, and his hands were always a little cracked, stained by engine oil and cardboard dust. Before all this, he liked simple order. In the warehouse, boxes sat where they were meant to sit, labels lined up straight, numbers that added up. It gave him a strange comfort. Life used to match that rhythm, quiet, steady, building toward something. Then he met Leona. She was 29, sharp-cheeked, always put together, the kind of woman who turned heads without trying. Her hair changed styles often, her nails were never bare, and her laugh could cut through any room. She made chaos look exciting. When they married, he thought he was stepping into color after a life in grayscale. Her money mistakes sounded small at first. A few old cards, a personal loan, some stupid decisions from when she was younger. She told him it was about 12,000. Her eyes got glossy when she said it, and her voice shook just enough to sound ashamed. He took her hands and said, "We'll fix it. Together." That word, together, felt like a promise he was proud to carry. What he did not know then was that the real number was far from 12. And that the woman who cried in his arms about debt would one day sit on a bed at 4:47 a.m., joking about her personal ATM. So he stepped back from the doorway, quiet as a stranger. His chest felt hollow, but his thoughts were suddenly sharp. Instead of waking her, instead of begging for an explanation, Malachi walked to the dim living room, sat on the edge of the couch, and opened the Notes app on his phone. Title: Leona, Debts, Words, Dates. First entry: 4:47 a.m. Personal ATM, wrapped around her finger. He did not know it yet, but that single note was the moment his love story stopped being blind trust and became evidence. Malachi thought the body adjusts to hard work. It doesn't. It just learns how to suffer in silence a little better. By the time the sun rose on Monday, Malachi had already finished his first shift, started his second, and swallowed 2 energy drinks on an empty stomach just to stay upright. Some nights, he would catch his reflection in a car window and not recognize the man staring back. Eyes dull, shoulders slumped, lips moving as he whispered numbers under his breath, trying to make the math of their life work. If you're still here, true hearts, let that tell you something. Hit like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes in the comments if you've ever pushed your body past its limit for someone who said, "It's just for a while." Don't scroll past this and pretend you don't see yourself in him, because this might be the story that finally makes you stop doing that. Malachi's week did not have days anymore. It had blocks of time and alarms. Warehouse from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m., 5 days a week. Rideshare from 7 p.m. to 1 or 2 a.m., depending on demand. Hardware store on Saturdays, inventory gigs squeezed into off hours, and the packing facility whenever they called, which was often. Sleep slipped into the cracks. 2 hours here, 40 minutes there, sitting in his car with the seat pushed back, engine off, phone on silent. He kept a small notebook in his glove compartment with columns. In, out, debt. Every tip, every extra hour, every side job got logged. Leona's debts, the ones he knew about, were stacked in careful lines of ink. He would sit in a cafe between shifts, washing down a stale sandwich with cheap coffee, running his finger down the page, as if discipline alone could make the numbers shrink. People told him he was inspiring. Co-workers said things like, "Man, you're a machine," or "Your wife must know she hit the jackpot." He would force a tired smile and answer, "I'm just doing what I can," while his legs throbbed and his lower back burned from lifting, driving, standing. No one saw him later, in the dark of his car, rubbing his chest because the tightness there felt wrong for someone his age. His social life evaporated without a fight. He stopped showing up to game nights, stopped answering messages from friends who wanted to catch up. They eventually stopped asking. Birthdays, barbecues, late-night chats, these became things other people had. His world shrank to roads, warehouses, checkout counters, and the soft buzz of payment notifications on his phone. Leona framed it like they were on a mission. She would hold his face and say, "Just a little longer, Mal. Once this is over, we'll travel. We'll breathe again." She posted healing journey quotes on her socials, shared photos of their cheap takeout nights as proof of simple love, and wrote captions about gratitude. To anyone watching, she looked like a woman rebuilding her life with a devoted husband at her side. He clung to that image when his body screamed for rest. When his eyes blurred behind the wheel at midnight, he told himself, "We're almost there." When his manager at the warehouse warned him, "You look rough, man. Don't burn out," he laughed it off and said, "I'm good." But there were moments, brief flashes, when he caught his hands shaking as he counted change, or woke up not remembering driving home. The cruel part was this: he thought the pain meant progress. He believed every sacrifice was a brick in the foundation of their future. He did not know that while he was chasing sleep and overtime, Leona was chasing something else with the money he bled for. She told him they were healing. He repeated that word like a prayer, not realizing that for her, it meant something entirely different. Malachi thought pain was something you entered slowly. He did not realize some of the worst pain in his life started with a soft voice, wet eyes, and a number that was not even close to the truth. 3 weeks after the wedding, Leona sat cross-legged on their bed, clutching a folder to her chest like it was a bomb. "Promise you won't hate me," she whispered, tears already sliding down her face. Malachi's heart dropped, but he still reached for her hand and said, "Whatever it is, we'll handle it." He believed that. He had no idea that this was the night she would rewrite their entire marriage, with one lie wrapped in a confession. True hearts, if you're still here, your chest probably feels tight right now. Tap like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes if you've ever trusted someone more than you trusted your own doubts. Don't just watch this. Use this story as a mirror. They were in their honeymoon phase, at least on the outside. The cheap apartment suddenly felt romantic. They joked about how it would be their before picture once life got better. They ate noodles out of the pot, watched movies on a second-hand TV, and talked about future trips they could not yet afford. Malachi held on to those moments like proof that the struggle would be worth it. That night, he came home from the warehouse to find the living room unusually tidy. Candles flickered on the coffee table. Leona looked smaller than usual, shoulders hunched, eyes red. The folder in her hands was thick, edges worn, like it had been opened and closed 100 times. "Mal, can you sit?" she asked, voice thin. He sat without thinking, his stomach already knotting. She crawled across the bed to face him, knees touching his, fingertips trembling. "I haven't been fully honest," she said. "I told you I had some debt. Around 12,000. He nodded slowly. They had talked about it before the wedding. He had promised to help. He had factored it into his plans, his budgets, his late-night calculations. Her chin shook. "I lied," she whispered. "It's more." Silence stretched. The candle beside them hissed as wax met flame. He swallowed, bracing for a number, something higher, but still survivable. "Okay," he said. "How much more?" She opened the folder and turned it toward him. Statement after statement, balances, late fees, red letters, names of banks he did not recognize. Her fingers hovered over the totals, then landed on one page. "About 98,000, she finally forced out. Her voice cracked on the last word. She covered her face, shoulders shaking. The number hit him like a physical blow. 98, not 12. His first instinct was disbelief. His second was to comfort her. He wrapped his arms around her as she sobbed into his chest, repeating, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was scared you'd leave. I'm trying to change. Please don't give up on me." His brain raced ahead, doing warped, frantic math. Years of work, interest, sacrifices. But his heart kept circling back to one thing. She was terrified. That was what he saw. Not the pattern, not the deception, just fear. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, kissing the top of her head. "We're married. We'll fix this. I'll help you out of it." The relief in her exhale felt like a reward. She clung to his shirt, like he was the only solid thing in her life. Later, she framed it as a turning point. She said, "This is my rock bottom. You're my second chance." And Malachi, who believed in second chances more than he believed in sleep, decided that night to become the solution to a problem he did not create. What he could not see yet was how carefully that confession was timed, how she cried just enough to make him feel like a hero, and how that 98,000 was not just a number, but a doorway into a life where his love would be measured in shifts, invoices, and overdrafts. Years later, when he scrolled back through that memory, he would realize something chilling. That night was not her breakdown. It was the first move in a long, quiet game. Malachi always thought betrayal would feel loud. Instead, when it finally settled in, it sounded like paper, screens, and quiet clicks in the dark. The morning after he heard personal ATM at 4:47 a.m., Malachi went to work like nothing had happened. He joked with co-workers, scanned pallets, signed off on deliveries. But inside, something had shifted. He was no longer just a husband trying to fix a mess. He was a man taking mental pictures of everything, saving them for later. True hearts, if you're still here, your heart already knows this feeling when you start smiling on the outside and documenting on the inside. Tap like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes if you've ever had to act normal while quietly realizing someone you love might be playing you. Don't just watch this. Let it wake up the part of you that stopped trusting your own red flags. Leona thought he was too tired to notice patterns. That was her first mistake. For months, she had built a routine. She rushed to the mailbox first. She insisted on handling all the boring letters. and she acted annoyed whenever he asked simple questions like, "How much is left now?" She always had an answer that sounded hopeful, never exact. "Almost halfway," or "It's going down, I promise." He wanted to believe her. He did believe her, until 4:47 a.m. That night. Instead of collapsing on the couch after his shift, Malachi opened his old laptop and created a folder on the desktop. He named it something boring, appliance manuals, so it would not raise suspicion if she ever glanced at the screen. Inside, he made subfolders: bank statements, credit cards, messages, receipts. His hands shook a little as he worked, not from fear, but from exhaustion mixed with a new, sharp focus. He started small. Whenever Leona left her purse on the table, he memorized the names of the banks on her cards. On nights when she fell asleep with her phone unlocked beside her, he did not scroll through conversations out of jealousy. He went straight to email and banking apps, just long enough to see subject lines, logos, balances. He didn't take screenshots on her phone. He took pictures with his fast, quiet, cropped tight. At the warehouse during lunch breaks, he pulled up online portals and requested copies of statements tied to his name. He checked his credit report, something he had not done in years. He expected to see the debts he'd already agreed to help with. Instead, he found accounts he had never opened, lines of credit with balances that made his stomach twist. One afternoon, sitting in his car behind the building, he opened a PDF and saw his own name on a credit line he did not recognize. His birthday, his address, her spending. His thumb hovered over the screen as reality settled in a second time. This was not just about her past mistakes. Someone was actively using his life as collateral. He started printing things at a small copy shop a few blocks away, paying in cash, slipping pages into a plain black folder he kept in the trunk of his car. Folder 1, payment history, letters he'd never been shown, overdue notices redirected to a P.O. box he didn't even know they had. Every new page made him less confused and more certain. At home, he acted the same. He kissed her forehead, asked about her day, let her vent about how heavy it all felt. But while she talked, he listened for numbers, dates, inconsistencies. He wasn't trying to win an argument anymore. He was building a record. One night, while organizing scanned files on his laptop, Malachi opened a statement he hadn't looked at closely before. At first, it seemed like all the others: charges, dates, balances climbing. Then his eyes caught a line he'd never forget, tied to an account he thought he understood. He zoomed in, reading the description twice, then 3 times, feeling the room go still around him. This wasn't just debt. It was something else. Something worse. He sat back in his chair, the blue light from the screen washing over his tired face, and realized he had just stumbled onto a secret Leona never meant for him to see. Folder 1 was no longer enough. He was about to open a door into an entirely different level of betrayal. Add to follow-up check sources, Malachi had gotten used to seeing numbers that hurt. What he found next wasn't just a number. It was his name, twisted into something he never agreed to. In the glow of his laptop screen, Malachi zoomed in on the header of the statement. He expected Leona's name like always. Instead, he saw his full name, his birthday, his address, and next to it, a credit limit he had never applied for, and a balance sitting at $18,000 and climbing. True hearts, if your stomach dropped just now, don't ignore that feeling. Hit like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and flood the comments with hypes if you've ever found out someone you trusted used your name, your kindness, or your effort like it was theirs to sign away. Don't just watch. Let this story remind you that loyalty without boundaries can become a weapon in the wrong hands. He stared at the screen so long his eyes started to sting. At first, his mind tried to explain it away. Maybe it was a bank error. Maybe he had forgotten something from years ago. But the open date was recent, months after the wedding, right in the middle of his 5-job grind. This wasn't history. This was current. He scrolled through the charges. They weren't for groceries or emergency bills. They were neat little lines of indulgence. Beauty stores, online boutiques, a high-end shoe outlet, deposits to apps he'd never used. Every line whispered the same thing. Someone was living well while he lived in survival mode. The worst part was not the 18,000. It was the realization that this account existed because someone had answered questions only he should know. His first school, his mother's middle name, old addresses, details he hadn't said out loud in years. There were only 2 people who had ever filled in those blanks on forms with him: his mother and Leona. The next morning, over coffee, Leona slid into the chair across from him, nails freshly done, phone face down on the table. She smiled lightly, voice soft. "You're quiet," she said. "Is everything okay?" He studied her for a long moment. This woman who said she was drowning. This woman who cried about old mistakes while swiping cards he didn't know existed. "Just tired," he replied, forcing a small smile. He did not mention the statement. Not yet. Inside, something had changed again. This was no longer just about helping her heal. This was legal. This was his credit, his future, his name being dragged through mud he didn't step in. Later that day, on his lunch break, he sat in his car with the doors locked and the engine off. He dialed the bank's customer service line and listened as the automated voice listed options that did not quite cover, "My wife might have opened this behind my back." When he finally reached a human, he asked for application details. The rep read out an address, his date of birth, and a contact number he recognized: Leona's. His chest tightened. He thanked the rep, got off the call, and stared through the windshield at nothing. This was confirmation. Not a suspicion. Not a feeling. Proof. Malachi opened his Notes app again and added a new entry under the growing list. Hidden credit card. My name, her number. Balance, 18,032. His thumb hovered over the screen for a second before he added one more line. This is not just debt. This is fraud. He leaned his head back against the seat and let out a long, slow breath. There was a time he would have confronted her in tears, asking why. That version of him was gone. If she saw him as an ATM, fine. But ATMs record every transaction. And now, so would he. That afternoon, instead of going straight home after his shift, Malachi parked outside a small office building with a simple sign on the door and walked in. He didn't tell Leona where he was. He just stepped up to the reception desk and said the words that meant this was no longer just a private heartbreak. "I need to speak to a lawyer." Malachi had always been the one asking, "How can I fix this?" For the first time, he sat down in front of someone whose job was to look at the damage and say, "Here's how you protect yourself." The office was small, quiet, and smelled faintly of paper and lemon cleaner. No marble floors, no dramatic artwork, just shelves of files and a simple nameplate on the desk. Renita Graves, Esq. She was in her early 40s, with short, neat hair, calm brown eyes, and an expression that said she had seen worse and would not be impressed by chaos. She did not start with comfort. She started with clarity. "Tell me why you're here," she said, clicking her pen. "True hearts, if you've ever been the one making excuses for someone else's choices, listen closely. Tap like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes if you've ever needed someone to look you in the eye and say, 'You are not crazy. This is not love. This is abuse dressed up as loyalty. Don't just watch this episode. Let it remind you that protecting yourself is not betrayal. Malachi laid out the facts. 5 jobs. 98,000 in old debts he'd been helping pay. The personal ATM phone call at 4:47 a.m. The hidden credit card in his name with an 18,000 balance. He slid the black folder across the desk. Printouts, photos, notes, dates, everything he had gathered when the shock finally gave way to strategy. Renita flipped through each page slowly, her eyes moving in clean, efficient lines. She asked precise questions. Did you ever sign for this account? Do you have proof of when you learned the real total? Has she ever admitted, in a text or message, that she opened anything in your name? He answered as clearly as he could, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. Talking to her felt different from talking to friends or co-workers. There was no, maybe she didn't mean it. No, everyone makes mistakes. Just facts, consequences, options. Legally, she said at last, tapping the hidden card statement with her pen, this is serious. If she used your information without consent, that is fraud. We can challenge responsibility for that debt. Malachi swallowed. Can I get any of what I've already paid back? Renita leaned back, considering. Maybe. Not all. But possibly some. It will depend on what you can show. Transfers from your accounts to hers. Payments you made on debts that clearly trace back to her spending. She pointed at his notes. This was smart. Most people don't document. You did. He let out a breath he did not realize he'd been holding. Am I overreacting? He asked quietly. For months, that question had been chewing at him. Was he being dramatic? Petty? Ungrateful? Renita looked at him like she was measuring more than his words. No, she said. You're late. But you're not overreacting. Those words landed heavier than any apology Leona had ever given him. She laid out a plan in calm, simple steps. First, pull full credit reports and freeze future credit so no new lines could be opened in his name. Second, gather bank records showing his payments toward her debts. Third, stop paying anything he wasn't legally tied to until they sorted out what was truly his responsibility. Then she said the part that made his chest feel both tight and strangely light. Malachi, you don't just have a money problem. You have a marriage problem. If you choose to file for divorce, we document all of this. We argue that she misled you, that you carried her debts under false pretenses. You may not walk away clean, but you will not walk away empty. He stared at the neat stacks of paper between them, the quiet evidence of years he could not get back. Will this destroy her? He asked. Renita's expression did not soften, but it did shift. This isn't about destroying her, she said. This is about stopping her from destroying you. He nodded slowly. For the first time, the idea of leaving did not feel like betrayal. It felt like survival. She slid a single form toward him. If you're ready, she said, we start here. We do not warn her. We do not fight in the kitchen. We do this the right way, on paper, with timing she can't control. Malachi picked up the pen. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of the decision. This time, he was not signing up to fix her past. He was signing to rewrite his own future. Leona always chose the right moments to act soft. The day Malachi really knew, who he was married to, she smelled like expensive perfume and coconut lotion, not like someone drowning in debt. It was a Saturday afternoon, one of the few days when his schedule was lighter. He had just finished a morning shift at the hardware store and come home with sore feet and a half-eaten sandwich in his bag. When he opened the door, the apartment smelled like vanilla candles and takeout, nice, warm, staged. Leona stood in the kitchen wearing a soft lounge set that did not look cheap, her hair pinned up, nails newly done in a glossy nude shade. She turned, smiled like she had been waiting just for him, and wrapped her arms around his waist. "My hard-working man," she said, kissing his cheek. "You need to slow down. You're going to burn out." True hearts. If you've ever had someone worry about your health while secretly feeding the very fire that's killing you, this part is for you. Hit like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales. And send your hypes if you've ever felt a hug that suddenly didn't feel like comfort. It felt like control in disguise. Malachi felt the weight of her words and the weight of his folder in the trunk of his car at the same time. He had already met with Renita. He had already signed the first form. He knew about the hidden card, the fake healing, the quiet fraud. Now, watching Leona play the loving wife role, something inside him went very still. She guided him to the couch, pushed him gently down, and sat beside him, legs tucked under her. "You're doing too much," she said, tracing circles on his arm. "I hate seeing you this tired. Maybe you should drop one of the jobs. We'll figure it out." The words might have broken him a month before, back when he believed every tear, every every "we'll figure it out." Now, they sounded different. They sounded like someone talking to a resource they didn't want to lose, not a man they were trying to protect. His eyes dropped to her nails, perfect, glossy, freshly done. He thought of the statement with the beauty store charges, of the late-night orders, of the 18,000 in his name. "When did you get those done?" he asked casually. She blinked, then smiled. "Oh, these? My friend covered it. Girl stuff. Don't worry about it." He nodded like he believed her. He didn't. He logged the date in his head anyway. That evening, while he sat at the small table checking his notebook, she leaned against the doorway, watching him. "You know," she said softly, "once this is behind us, you won't have to work like this. We'll travel. Maybe hit the islands. You deserve that." He looked up at her. Really looked. The woman painting vacations with his money, his credit, his health. "Yeah," he said. "I guess we'll see." Later that night, after she fell asleep with a face mask on and a silk bonnet tied neatly in place, he slipped his phone out and opened his photos. He scrolled through the statements, the screenshots of her spending, the notes from his meeting with Renita. One charge, dated that same week, caught his eye. A luxury brand purchase that cost more than his monthly share of the rent. His chest tightened, not from surprise, but from confirmation. Earlier that day, while he was stocking shelves and answering customers about drill bits, Leona had been somewhere else, handing over a card tied to his name, buying something she'd later call just a little treat. He locked his phone and stared at the dark ceiling. It was no longer a question of whether she respected him. It was a question of how long he could pretend not to see what was right in front of him. The next notification that would prove everything came that same night, just past midnight. A bank alert he almost ignored, until he saw the amount and where it was spent. It wasn't just a treat. It was a handbag worth his rent. Malachi used to think bills were just paper. By the time he finished opening folder 2, he understood they were a map of every lie she'd told him. The bank alert hit his phone at 12:18 a.m. He was parked outside a late-night diner between rides, eyes half closed, when the notification lit up his screen. A charge that matched almost exactly what he paid for rent. Same hidden card. Same name. His. Location. A high-end boutique he had never stepped into. True hearts. If your chest got tight reading that, don't brush it off. Tap like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes if you've ever watched money you bled for vanish on things you never agreed to. This isn't just drama. For some of you, it's a little too close to your real life. The next morning, Malachi didn't argue. He didn't even mention the alert. He just went to the trunk of his car, pulled out the black folder, and decided folder 1 was no longer enough. There needed to be a folder 2. He started with the mailbox. For years, Leona had treated it like a race. She always offered to grab the mail first, laughing it off as a habit. Now, he understood why. So he beat her to it. On a Tuesday afternoon, he came home early, waited near the boxes, and opened their slot as soon as the mail carrier walked away. Inside were envelopes with her name, his name, and names he didn't recognize, all tied to the same address. Some were regular statements. Others were those quiet, dangerous letters with phrases like urgent, final notice, and account action required. He took photos, front and back, before putting everything neatly back and closing the box. At night, while she scrolled on her phone beside him, he dug deeper online. He pulled full credit reports again and traced dates, noticing a pattern. When one card neared its limit, another appeared. Balances shifted, interest moved, payments bounced between accounts like a shell game designed to keep him confused. He noticed something else. Certain debts were tied to a P.O. box across town. He had never rented a P.O. box. When he asked, casual as he could, "Do we get any mail somewhere else?" She frowned and said, "Why would we? Everything comes here." He nodded, filing away another lie. On his next day off, not that he really had those anymore, he drove to the post office listed on one of the letters. A few questions, a flash of ID, and a low-voiced clerk later, he confirmed it. A box rented in her name, paid in cash, with his last name attached. Mail redirected there. Debt rerouted away from their front door. Folder 2 began to swell. Printed credit reports, scanned statements, screenshots of balances before and after mysterious payments that simply shifted debt from one card to another. Dates lined up with their arguments, their "we're almost through this" talks, and her sudden mood swings when certain envelopes arrived. One night, sitting alone at the kitchen table while Leona took a long bath, Malachi spread everything out. It looked less like a financial problem and more like a web, every line crossing over another, every decision pulling him deeper in. There were cards she'd opened before they met, cards she'd opened after the wedding, refinanced accounts he never heard about, closed accounts that jumped to new banks, and ghost accounts that only showed up in tiny footnotes on reports. He circled dates with a red pen. He matched them to screenshots of her "I'm trying my best" messages. The contrast made his stomach twist. While he was driving half asleep, she was staying just one step ahead of the people she owed, using his name as a shield. He added a small note at the bottom of one page. Pattern, move, hide, repeat. By the time he slid the last sheet into folder 2, Malachi knew two things for sure. First, he had enough to prove this wasn't a misunderstanding. Second, as bad as this looked, money was only part of the story. Because the worst folder, the one that would show what she was really doing while he worked himself to the bone, had nothing to do with numbers. It had everything to do with how she lived when she thought he'd never find out. Add to follow-up check sources. Malachi thought the worst part of the debt was the numbers. Folder 3 proved the worst part was how happy she looked while he was breaking. Folder 1 was about payments. Folder 2 was about patterns. Folder 3 was about lifestyle. The way Leona lived when she thought my personal ATM would never compare notes. True hearts, if you're still here, your heart already knows this kind of fear. What if I found out what they really do when I'm not around? Hit like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes if you've ever had that gut feeling that someone's struggle story didn't match the life they were actually living. Don't just watch. Let this be the episode that reminds you. Screenshots don't lie. It started with a simple question he asked himself one night in his parked car. If she's drowning, why does she look so put together? Her nails were always fresh. Her hair never missed an appointment. There were new shoes, new bags, new outfits that did not line up with the "we're barely making it" speeches. So Malachi went where most people accidentally tell the truth. Their digital trail. Leona loved photos. She posted cautiously online. But she forgot one thing. Cloud backups keep what you don't show the world. On a night when she fell asleep on the couch, phone resting on her chest, he stayed very still and took a risk. He opened her gallery. He didn't go through her messages looking for other men. He went through albums looking for receipts, locations, timestamps. There they were. Spa rooms with soft lighting and white robes. Tables at high-end restaurants. Plates lined with food he'd never tasted. Shopping bags with logos he recognized from the statements in folder 2. In one photo, she was holding up a designer handbag, the same brand as the midnight charge that matched his rent. Her caption, saved but never posted, read, "Self-care after all the stress. I deserve this." He took pictures of the pictures, careful and fast, backing out of apps as soon as he was done. Each screenshot became part of folder 3, her healing in full color. There were appointment confirmation emails for spa packages he never knew she booked. Loyalty points from beauty stores he'd never stepped inside. Digital receipts for late-night rides that didn't match his routes or their shared locations. Trips across town while he was on the clock, thinking she was home, resting. One image stuck with him. Leona, in a plush robe, glass of champagne in hand, toes freshly painted, smiling so wide it almost hurt to look at. The timestamp matched a night he remembered clearly. A night he'd worked back-to-back shifts, come home to find her too tired to talk, and fallen asleep sitting up on the couch. That was the night she'd texted him, "Thank you for not giving up on me. I'm really trying." He had believed her. He'd screenshotted that message back then because it made him feel seen. Now he printed it and slid it into folder 3, right next to the spa photo from the same day. He didn't cry. He didn't punch a wall. He just stared, letting the two realities sit side by side. His suffering and her softness, both funded by the same exhausted man. From that point on, Malachi stopped asking himself if he was overreacting. He started asking a different question. When this goes to court, will it be enough? Looking at folder 3, he realized something terrifying and strangely comforting at the same time. He had enough proof to walk into any room, legal, spiritual, emotional, and say, "This is what I paid for. This is what she chose." He already had enough to fight. But a part of him, the part that still remembered their laughter over cheap noodles, wanted more than just legal victory. He wanted truth to come out of her own mouth. So he kept collecting, kept smiling, kept playing the role she expected, all while building the case that would one day shatter the image she'd built of him as nothing but her silent, obedient ATM. Malachi did not cry when he sold his motorcycle. He told himself it was just a thing. But the emptiness in his chest when the buyer rode away said otherwise. The motorcycle had been his one selfish purchase before marriage. Nothing fancy, but it was freedom on 2 wheels, a way to clear his head after long shifts, a reminder that he was more than bills and barcodes. When the money started tightening, it sat more and more in the parking lot, dust collecting on the seat, his helmet hanging like a question mark off the handlebar. One evening, after staring at another stack of due dates and red numbers, he made the choice. He took photos from 3 angles, listed it online, and wrote the ad in simple words: reliable, well cared for, selling to focus on family debts. The bike sold faster than he expected. The buyer showed up with cash, eyes shining as he revved the engine. "Why you letting it go?" the guy asked. Malachi forced a smile. "Priorities," he said. "True hearts. If you've ever let go of the one thing that made you feel alive just to keep someone else's life from falling apart, this part is for you. Hit like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes if you've ever traded joy for responsibility and been told it was no big deal. Don't just watch. Let this sit with you." When the bike disappeared down the road, the parking spot looked wrong. Too open. Too quiet. He stood there for a long minute, hands in his pockets, feeling like he'd just buried a piece of himself. He walked back upstairs with an envelope of cash tucked inside his jacket. Leona met him at the door, eyes wide. "Did it sell?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, placing the envelope on the table. "All of it's going toward the cards this week." She hugged him, arms around his neck, voice muffled in his shoulder. "You're amazing, Mal. I don't deserve you." He wanted those words to mean something. Instead, they sounded like a script she'd used before. They sat down together as he logged the payment into his notebook. Amount, date, which account it hit. He watched the balance drop on one of the statements from folder 2. It wasn't freedom, but it was movement. He told himself this sacrifice would speed up the end of their nightmare. 2 days later, on his lunch break, another bank alert lit up his phone. New purchase. Same hidden card in his name. The amount? Just a little less than what he'd gotten for the bike. Location. A luxury store he recognized from ads and magazines. The kind of place people joked you couldn't even breathe in without paying. His stomach went cold. He opened folder 3 later that night, and, sure enough, found the digital clue. A photo of Leona in a mirror, handbag hanging off her arm, lips glossed, nails perfect, eyes bright. Saved to her cloud, never posted. Caption, unsent, but telling. Sometimes you have to treat yourself. No one else will. He stared at the screen in the dark, his chest heavy. On one side of his life, a man selling the last thing that felt like his. On the other, a woman using that sacrifice to walk out of a store with a logo and a bag he was paying for twice. Once in money, once in pieces of his soul. He didn't confront her that night. He didn't ask, "Is that where the money went?" He was past needing her spin. Instead, he added a new line to his notes. Sold bike, amount. 2 days later, store, amount. Same card, same name, different priorities. He went to bed beside her, listening to her soft, even breathing. She looked peaceful. He felt like a ghost in his own life. The court date was coming. Every shift, every sale, every secret purchase was becoming part of a story that would soon be told in a room where feelings mattered less than evidence. And with every new entry in his folders, Malachi understood something clearly. He wasn't just preparing to leave a marriage. He was preparing to lay out, piece by piece, exactly what his love had been turned into. Malachi expected the next crack in his reality to come from Leona. He did not expect it to come from her mother, holding a phone she didn't know was a live grenade. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind that used to mean naps and movies before his life turned into shifts and spreadsheets. Malachi was sitting at the small dining table, organizing copies for Renita, when Leona's phone lit up on the couch with a name he recognized, Mom. Leona was in the shower, music playing loud. The call rang, stopped, then started again like urgency. True hearts, if you've ever overheard something that made the whole story shift in your head, listen close. Tap like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes if you've ever realized the truth by accident. Not because someone confessed, but because they slipped. On the third ring, Malachi picked up. "Hey, Mom," he said, trying to sound relaxed. There was a pause, then Leona's mother sighed in relief. "Oh, Malachi, I'm glad it's you," she said. "I've been worried. How's my girl? She told us things are finally calm now, that all her old debts are gone." His hand tightened around the phone. "Gone?" he repeated. "Yes," her mother continued. "She said you helped her clear everything. We've been thanking God for you. She said you're working, but not like before. You're resting more now, yes?" Resting. The word landed like a bad joke. He glanced at his notes on the table. Shifts, payments, folders, court dates. He looked at the clock, counting how many hours of sleep he'd had that week. He forced his voice to stay even. "Who told you everything was cleared?" "Leona, of course," her mother said, almost offended by the question. "She cried on video call, said you saved her life, said she feels so guilty you worked so hard, but now it's all behind you two. She said you're finally getting back to normal." Normal. Malachi stared at the stack of evidence in front of him. Proof that the debts weren't gone, just rearranged and hidden. Proof of the card in his name, the spa days, the handbag. "Has she asked you for help recently?" he asked quietly. There was another pause. "No," her mother said. "She promised us she wouldn't anymore now that you stepped in. We told her she had to stop relying on us. You've been such a blessing. We were worried she might burn you out, but she swore she wouldn't let that happen." He swallowed hard. So, in her parents' version of the story, he was the hero. In hers, to her friends and whoever had been on that 4:47 a.m. call, he was the personal ATM wrapped around her finger. He could have shattered their illusion right there. He could have said, "She's still spending. She opened accounts in my name. I'm meeting with a lawyer." Instead, he heard himself say, "I'll always do my best to take care of her." Because in that moment, he realized something important. Her parents had no idea who their daughter really was with money. They were not his enemies. They were just another part of the story she'd edited. Leona came out of the bathroom a few minutes later, towel around her hair, steam trailing after her. "Was that my mom?" she asked, reaching for her phone. "Yeah," he said, watching her face. "She said she's glad everything's behind us." Leona's eyes flickered for less than a second. Then she pasted on a soft smile. "See," she said, "they're finally not stressed about me anymore. We're doing good, Mal." "We." The word tasted sour now. That night, Malachi added a new line to his notes. "Her parents think the debts are gone. She told them I'm resting more. They see me as a hero. She sees me as a joke." He stared at the sentence for a long time before adding one more. Moral question. Do I tell them the truth, or let court speak for me? For the first time, he felt something shift in his favor. Not because he'd won anything yet, but because the mask she wore with her family did not match the one she wore at 4:47 a.m. And masks, once they start to slip, rarely stay on for long. Malachi always thought the day everything changed would feel dramatic. In reality, it looked like a stranger at his door holding a manila envelope, and asking for his wife by her full name. It was a Wednesday evening, just after sunset. Malachi had come home early for once, folders stacked neatly in his bag, timelines and screenshots already shared with Renita. The plan was moving. All that was left was timing. When the knock came, it was firm, official, not the light tap of a neighbor or the rushed pounding of a delivery driver. Leona was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, a blanket over her legs, a scented candle burning like they lived in a calm, normal home. She didn't move. "Babe, can you get that?" she called. True hearts. If you've ever felt your heart race because you knew what was about to happen, even though the other person had no idea, this moment is for you. Hit like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes if you've ever watched karma walk up to someone's front door while they were still pretending everything was fine. Malachi opened the door to find a man in a plain button-up, badge clipped to his belt, envelope in hand. "Good evening," the man said. "I'm looking for Leona Harrow." For a split second, Malachi almost said, "She's not home." Old habits, old instincts to protect her from anything stressful. Instead, he stepped aside. "She's right here," he said. Leona looked up, confused, then annoyed. "Who is it?" she asked, pushing the blanket off. The man stepped just inside the doorway, staying in clear view. "Ma'am, are you Leona Harrow?" She frowned. "Yes. Why?" He held out the envelope. "You've been served." The words landed between them like something dropped and shattered on the floor. Leona froze, eyes bouncing from the man to Malachi and back. "What is this?" she demanded, not taking it at first. The server remained calm. "Divorce petition and related filings," he said. "Please read everything carefully. You've been officially notified." Her hand finally closed around the envelope. He gave a short nod and left, the door clicking softly behind him. For a few long seconds, the apartment was silent. No music, no candle crackle, just the sound of paper shifting as her fingers tightened. She looked at Malachi like he'd just spoken a language she didn't understand. "Is this a joke?" she asked, breath shallow. He met her eyes, feeling strangely calm. "No," he said. "It's not." She tore the envelope open, scanning the first page. Her mouth moved silently as she read the words: petition, fraud, reimbursement, division of assets. Then she hit the parts that listed his claims: accounts she opened in his name, debts concealed before marriage, proof of funds used for personal luxury. Her face went from confusion to outrage, to something closer to fear. "You talked to a lawyer?" she spat. "You're trying to make me look like some criminal?" He almost laughed. "Did I make you open cards in my name?" he asked quietly. "Did I make you tell your parents everything was cleared while you were still spending? Did I make you call me your personal ATM at 4:47 in the morning?" She flinched at that last part. Her lips parted, eyes widening. You heard that?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence between them did it for him. Her phone buzzed on the couch, another notification she ignored. She was too busy flipping pages now, scanning terms, seeing Renita's name at the bottom. "So that's it?" she asked, voice breaking. "After everything I've been through, you're just leaving? You're going to drag me to court and embarrass me?" "You embarrassed yourself," he said, still steady. "All I did was keep the receipts." She sank onto the couch, the papers trembling in her hands. Tears spilled. Fast and dramatic, the kind that used to move him into fixing mode. "Malachi, please," she whispered. "We can talk about this. We can work this out. Don't do this. I love you." Once, those words would have made him drop everything. Now, they sounded like another line in a script she'd rewritten too many times. "My lawyer's information is on the paperwork," he said, taking a step back. "If you have something to say about the debts, the cards, the spending, you can say it there." Her first text to him that night, hours later, would say, "I miss you. We can fix this." Her last one, after she really read what he was asking the court for, would call him something else entirely. But in that moment, standing in the doorway of the life he'd broken himself to fund, Malachi felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness, not revenge. Just the first small, solid taste of control. Malachi thought serving papers would be the peak of the drama. He was wrong. The real chaos started when Leona realized she could not control him anymore, so she tried to control his image instead. It started with a vibration on the warehouse supervisor's desk, a call from an unknown number that made his manager frown and wave him over. "Someone keeps calling asking for you," his manager said. "Says it's an emergency." Malachi's stomach sank before he even picked up. The moment he heard the shaky, oversweet voice on the other end, he knew. "Hi, this is Leona, Malachi's wife," she told his manager before the call got transferred. "He's been really unstable lately. I'm worried about him working around heavy equipment. He's not sleeping, he's paranoid, and he's lashing out. I just thought you should know." True hearts, if you've ever watched someone flip the script and paint you as the problem the moment you stopped being convenient, this is your scene. Tap like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes if you've ever had your sanity questioned just because you finally drew a line. By the time Malachi got the phone, she had already planted the seed. "Leona, what are you doing?" he asked, voice low. She ignored the calm. "You're ruining my life," she snapped. "You served me papers like I'm trash. If you lose your job because you're too stressed, maybe you'll rethink this." He glanced at his manager through the glass office window, watching him pretend not to listen. "Do not call my workplace," Malachi said. "If you have something to say it through your lawyer." She scoffed and hung up. His manager raised an eyebrow when he stepped out. "Everything okay?" Malachi held his ground. "My wife is upset about the divorce," he said simply. "She's trying to stir things up. My work is solid. You know that." His manager studied him for a beat, then nodded. "Your work speaks for itself," he said. "Just keep me in the loop if anything escalates." It did. 2 nights later, Malachi was halfway through a rideshare shift when he saw her standing at the pickup zone, hair wild, eyes red, clutching her phone like a weapon. At first, he thought it was coincidence. Then she marched straight to his car and yanked the back door handle. "Leona, get out of the driveway," he said, locking the doors. He had a passenger in the back seat, staring wide-eyed. She raised her voice, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Oh, now you want boundaries?" she shouted. "You can drag me to court, but can't talk to your own wife?" The app was still running. His passenger shifted uncomfortably. "Do you need me to cancel?" they whispered. Malachi forced his voice to stay level. "Leona, you're interfering with my work. Step away from the car." Instead, she stepped closer. "You're acting like a victim," she said. "Tell your little clients how you abandoned your wife with mental health issues so you could play lawyer games." Every word was designed to hit where it hurt. His reputation, his sense of responsibility, his fear of being seen as cold. He put the car in park, rolled the window down halfway, and met her eyes. "This is the last time I'm going to say this in person," he said calmly. "Talk to my lawyer, not my boss, not my clients, not my co-workers. Me and you? We're done talking outside of that." She stared at him, breathing hard, realizing anger wasn't moving him anymore. For the first time, her voice dropped. "You're really going to do this," she whispered. "You're really going to let people think I'm the villain?" He almost laughed at the word let. "You did that yourself," he answered. "I'm just done hiding it." He drove off, heart pounding, leaving her in the rearview mirror, small, furious, shouting at a car that did not stop this time. His passenger finally exhaled. "Man," they said quietly, "whatever you're going through, I hope you win." Later that night, his phone lit up with a string of messages from Leona. First, "You're heartless." Then, "You ruined us." Finally, "You'll regret making me look crazy." Malachi read them once, then forwarded the entire thread to Renita. No reaction. No reply to Leona. Because from that point on, every outburst, every smear, every scene she created in public became something very simple in his mind. More evidence. Malachi always pictured courtrooms as places other people ended up in. The day of the settlement conference, he walked into one knowing more about his own life on paper than his wife ever expected him to. The conference room was smaller than he imagined. No dramatic TV courtroom, just a long table, a pitcher of water, and 3 kinds of silence: his, hers, and the mediator's. Leona walked in dressed like innocence. Soft blouse, minimal makeup, hair pulled back, eyes already shiny like she might cry at any moment. She chose the chair beside her attorney, close enough to lean into the role. Confused wife, overwhelmed, blindsided by legal language. "Thank you all for being here," she said softly, as if she'd planned a meeting instead of being summoned to it. True hearts, if you're still here, hit like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes if you've ever watched someone act like the victim in a story you know they wrote. Some of you have lived this scene word for word in smaller rooms. She started early. "I just want my marriage," she told the mediators, voice trembling. "He's changed. He's angry all the time. I made mistakes with money, yes, but I've been trying. I didn't know he was going to drag me here and call me a fraud." Her attorney nodded along as if this were a simple miscommunication. They framed it like a story of a struggling couple, a wife with poor financial habits, a husband under stress, exaggerating the damage. Renita didn't match the emotion. She matched the facts. When it was her turn, she slid folder 1 across the table, neatly labeled and tabbed. "This," she said calmly, "is the payment history of my client. You'll see transfers from his accounts covering debts incurred before the marriage and debts opened after, many of which he did not consent to." Page by page, she walked them through it. Dates, amounts, signatures that weren't his. Leona shifted in her seat. "That's old stuff," she cut in. "I told him about those cards. We agreed to tackle them together." Renita didn't flinch. She opened folder 2. "Let's talk about the accounts opened in his name," she said. "This is the application. You'll notice his birth date, his social security number, his address, and this contact phone." She tapped the page. "That number belongs to Mrs. Harrow." The room went quiet, in a new way. Not awkward, heavy. One mediator cleared their throat. "Mrs. Harrow, did you open this account using your husband's information?" Leona's eyes filled instantly. I managed our paperwork," she said. "He said I could handle things. I didn't think he'd mind. It was all for us." Renita slid another sheet forward, from folder 3. Printed screenshots of the luxury charges, spa days, boutique bags, lined up right next to Malachi's work logs and bank alerts. "For us?" Renita repeated, still even. "These purchases, are these necessities? Were these joint decisions?" Leona's jaw clenched. "I was under so much stress," she said. I needed to treat myself sometimes or I was going to break. He knows that. He knows how my anxiety gets. Renita didn't raise her voice. She just chose her moment. She picked up a printed transcript, Malachi's 4:47 a.m. note, backed by phone records of the call, and placed it in the center of the table. "One more thing," she said. "On this date, at this time, Mrs. Harrow referred to my client as, quote, my personal ATM wrapped around my finger. She went on to say he was just paying for my bad choices. That doesn't sound like someone who believes they're in a mutual healing journey." For the first time, Leona stopped performing and reacted. Her face flushed, and the softness dropped. "That's being taken out of context," she snapped. "I was venting to my friend. Everyone vents. He's acting like a martyr when all he did was throw money around and then resent me for it." The word martyr hung in the air. One of the mediators raised an eyebrow. "So you said those words?" they asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "I might have," she muttered. "I was angry. He knew what he was signing up for. I married him because he was safe, because he wanted to help. Now he wants to flip it and punish me? Safe?" The way she spit the word out made the room colder. Malachi didn't speak. He didn't have to. Her own sentence, "I married him because he was safe," landed harder than anything he could have said. Renita simply adjusted her glasses and made a note. "Let the record reflect," she said. "Mrs. Harrow acknowledges the personal ATM comment and states she chose my client because he was financially safe." In trying to defend herself, Leona had done the one thing Renita had been patiently waiting for. She pulled her own mask off. Add to follow-up check sources, Malachi had replayed that sentence in his head 100 times. "I married him because he was safe." He thought that was the worst of it, until she decided to explain what safe really meant. The air in the room felt thin after Renita's note. Leona shifted in her seat, realizing she'd gone further than her own attorney wanted. He leaned in to whisper, "Let's slow down." But she pulled away, eyes locked on Malachi like she was finally going to say what she'd been holding back. "You want the truth?" she said, voice shaking, not from tears this time, but from anger. "I didn't marry you because I was in love with your boring little routines. I married you because you were stable, because you weren't like the guys who ruined my credit. I didn't want to be saved. I wanted to be funded." True hearts. If those words hit you like a punch, breathe. Tap like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes if you've ever realized, too late, that someone loved your usefulness more than your heart. Her own attorney pinched the bridge of his nose. "Leona," he murmured, "that's not helping." She cut him off, the dam fully broken now. "You all act like I committed some crime," she snapped. "Do you know what it's like to be drowning? To have men use you, leave you with bills, then expect you to fix it alone? When I met him, he kept talking about providing and being a rock. He wanted to be the hero. So yes, I let him." Renita stayed unnervingly calm. "So when you opened lines of credit in his name," she asked, "was that part of letting him be the hero?" Leona's laugh came out sharp. "He was going to complain either way," she said. "At least this way, things got paid, and I didn't have to live like a ghost. You think I'm the only wife who uses her husband's info? Please." One of the mediators shifted in their chair. "So, you're confirming," they said slowly, "that you intentionally used his identity for debt he didn't agree to because you felt entitled to that support?" Leona's eyes flashed. "I'm confirming," she said, "that he knew what marrying me meant. Broken people come with baggage. He wanted the good parts, my looks, my energy, my loyalty, without understanding that loyalty has a price. Malachi finally spoke, his voice low but clear. Loyalty, he said, doesn't mean turning someone into an ATM and then laughing about it at 4:47 a.m. She turned on him, eyes wet now. You're acting like a victim, she repeated. You worked, you paid bills, you played provider. That was your choice. No one forced you. Renita slid a final page forward. A simple breakdown of his income versus the debt trail, color-coded, side by side with screenshots of Leona's self-care spending. At what point, Renita asked, does choice become coercion? When you hid the real total before the wedding? When you opened accounts in his name? When you mocked him as your personal ATM? Leona looked at the paper, then away. Her shoulders dropped. I was scared, she whispered. Scared of being poor again. Scared of going back. I saw him as protection. I knew he wouldn't leave if I made him feel needed. There it was, not shouted, not dramatic, just plain, cold strategy. One of the mediators wrote something down, then met her eyes. Mrs. Harrow, they said, what you've just described isn't partnership. It's exploitation. Leona opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, there was no script. Renita didn't push further. She didn't need to. She simply folded her hands and said, for the record, my client is not asking the court to punish Mrs. Harrow. He's asking not to be punished for her choices. He seeks reimbursement where the law allows, relief from debts incurred by fraud, and the right to walk away without being tied to spending he never agreed to. Leona stared at Malachi like she was seeing him for the first time. Not as a resource, not as a shield, but as someone she could no longer control. You really don't want me, she said softly. It wasn't a question. It was realization. Malachi felt tired clear down to his bones, but his answer came out steady. I wanted a wife, he said. I didn't know I was signing up to be a financial plan. Her lips trembled. That, more than any spreadsheet, any folder, any statement, was the moment the room shifted. Because this wasn't just venting anymore. This was confession. Malachi spent years explaining himself to people who weren't really listening. In court, for the first time, every word he spoke actually mattered. The courtroom was colder than he expected. No candles, no soft lighting, just wood, echo, and a judge who did not care about who seemed nice, only about what could be proven. Leona sat at her table in a muted dress, tissues already in hand. Malachi sat opposite, folders stacked neatly, heart steady in a way that felt new. True hearts, if you're still here, let that tell you something about your own story. Tap like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales. And send your hypes if you've ever wished someone would finally say your side out loud in a room where it counts. When they called his name, Malachi walked to the witness stand like he was walking through every year he'd lost. He raised his hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down with his fingers laced to keep them from shaking. Renita started simple. State your name and what you do for a living. Malachi Rowe, he said. I'm a warehouse supervisor, and for the last few years, I've also driven rideshare, worked weekends at a hardware store, taken inventory contracts, and night shifts at a packing facility. How many jobs at one time? 5, he answered. For how long? Almost 2 years. The judge watched him closely. Why so many? Malachi inhaled, then let it out slow. To pay down my wife's debts, he said. Debts, I was told, were about $12,000 before the wedding. I later learned they were closer to $98,000. And then there were accounts I never agreed to, opened in my name. Renita guided him through the story, not with drama, but with sharp, short questions. What changed at 4:47 a.m. on that day? He swallowed. I heard my wife on the phone, he said, laughing, calling me her personal ATM, saying I was just paying for her bad choices. A murmur rippled through the courtroom before the judge raised a hand for silence. And what did you do after that? Renita asked. I didn't confront her, Malachi replied. I started documenting statements, charges, accounts in my name. I checked my credit, pulled records, and realized this wasn't just old debt. This was ongoing. She opened a card with my information. The balance was about $18,000. The spending was luxury, bags, spa days, eating out, not survival. And your work schedule during this time? I was sleeping 3 to 4 hours on a good day, he said. Sometimes in my car between shifts. I sold my motorcycle to make a payment. 2 days later, there was a charge almost equal to that amount at a luxury store, on the card in my name. Renita nodded, then asked the question the whole room was already leaning toward. Did you ever give consent for your wife to open credit in your name? No, he said firmly. I never signed for it. I never agreed to it. I found out after the fact. The judge leaned forward. How has this affected you, Mr. Rowe? Malachi didn't dress it up. I lost sleep. I lost friends. I lost the one thing I bought just for myself. I damaged my health. My credit is tangled up with choices I didn't make, and I lost a marriage I thought was built on honesty. I'm not here to say I was perfect, he added. I chose to help. I chose to work. But I did not choose to be lied to about the amount, or to have debt created in my name, or to be mocked for sacrificing. For a moment, the room was completely still. No sniffles, no whispers, just the sound of the clerk flipping a page. Renita closed with one last question. If you had known the full truth, from the beginning, would you have agreed to carry all of this the way you did? Malachi looked at Leona, then back at the judge. No, he said quietly. I believe in helping the person I love, but you can't pour from an empty cup. And you shouldn't have to bleed for someone who sees you as a machine instead of a partner. He stepped down from the stand feeling lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because for the first time his pain had been laid out in a place where denial couldn't erase it. Then the clerk called the next name. Mrs. Harrow, please take the stand. And just like that, it was her turn. Leona had always been good at crying at the right time. In court, those tears finally had to compete with facts she couldn't edit. Leona took the stand with a tissue already in hand, shoulders slightly hunched, like the room itself was bullying her. She swore in, sat down, and her attorney moved in fast, trying to frame the story before Renita could touch it. Leona, he said gently, how would you describe your marriage to Malachi before money became a problem? She sniffed, eyes glistening. We were happy, she said. He was my safe place. I was a mess with money when we met. I told him I had debt. I told him I needed help. I never meant for it to get this bad. He nodded, guiding her. Did you love him? Yes, she said quickly. I still do. I know I made mistakes, but I was scared. I've dealt with anxiety, with feeling abandoned. When he started working all those jobs, I thought he wanted to. He said he wanted to take care of me. True hearts. If you've ever heard someone twist your choices into their excuse, you know this tone. Hit like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes if you've ever listened to someone make your sacrifice sound like their burden. Her attorney pushed the blame gently toward the edges. Did you ever intend to hurt him? No, she said. I never sat there thinking, How can I ruin his life? I was trying to breathe. Sometimes I spent when I shouldn't have, but it was my way of coping. I felt like he was always working, never home, and I was alone with my stress. Then it was Renita's turn. She didn't raise her voice. She just removed all the cushions from under Leona's story. "Mrs. Harrow," she began, "you've spoken a lot about your feelings. Let's talk about your actions." She held up a document. "This account, opened in your husband's name. You've already confirmed you filled in his information. Did you ever obtain his explicit permission to do that?" Leona's fingers tightened on the tissue. "I told him we needed more credit to stay afloat," she said. "He said, 'Do what you have to do.'" Renita didn't blink. "And did he sign the application?" Silence. "No," Leona admitted. "I took care of it. He hates paperwork. He always trusted me with that." "So you used his trust," Renita said calmly, "to open an account he never signed for, then ran up charges on luxury items and experiences. Is that correct?" Leona's eyes filled again. "I was not out partying every day," she snapped. "Sometimes it was just nails, or a bag, or a day at the spa so I didn't fall apart. He makes it sound like I was living some wild life while he suffered." Renita slid a photo across, one of the spa shots from folder 3, date clearly printed. "On this day," she said, "you purchased a spa package and luxury items. On that same date, your husband worked a double shift and sold his motorcycle to make a payment. Were you unaware of that?" Leona stared at the photo, then away. "I knew he was working," she whispered. "I didn't know about the motorcycle until after. I didn't ask him to sell it." "But you did use the card he was paying on," Renita replied. "You did call him your personal ATM on a phone call at 4:47 a.m., correct?" Leona's jaw tightened. "I was venting," she said. "I was angry and scared. I said things I didn't mean." The judge leaned forward. "You said you didn't want to be saved, you wanted to be funded," they reminded her, referencing the settlement conference notes. "Do you feel that was an accurate reflection of your mindset at the time?" For a moment, Leona looked like she might deny it. Then the fight in her eyes shifted into something else. Cornered pride. "Yes," she said quietly. "I was tired of being the one left with nothing. I wanted stability. He talked about being a provider. I believed him. So when he started acting like a victim for doing exactly what he promised, I broke. I said ugly things." Renita didn't pounce. She just let the admission hang there, then asked one last question. "Do you understand," she said, "that what you're describing is not just emotional struggle, but using someone's love and identity as a safety net for your choices?" Leona's eyes flashed with a mix of shame and stubbornness. "I understand he wants to make me look like a monster," she answered. "I'm not. I'm just someone who was tired of being broke and thought marriage meant we shared everything, even the damage." Malachi watched her, feeling something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not rage, but a kind of exhausted clarity. She wasn't lying anymore. She was finally saying the quiet part out loud. The judge glanced between them, expression unreadable. "Thank you, Mrs. Harrow," they said. "You may step down." As she walked back to her seat, she looked at Malachi for just a second. Eyes red, mascara smudged, resentment and regret fighting for space. He didn't look away. Because at that point, he didn't need to. He knew the court had just heard exactly what it needed. Not a villain speech, not a sob story, but a confession dressed up as self-defense. Add to follow-up check sources. Judgment didn't come with a gavel slam. It came in measured words that turned years of quiet suffering into a number and a line on a legal document. The courtroom felt even colder when both sides sat back down and the judge lowered their eyes to the file. No more performances, no more guiding questions, just pages and consequences. Malachi sat with his hands clasped, folders closed now, as if everything that needed to be seen had already been laid bare. Leona stared straight ahead, jaw tight, tissue shredded between her fingers. You could feel her willing the room to see her as the broken one, the one who needed protecting. The judge spoke slowly. "This is not a simple case of bad spending in a marriage," they began. "What we have here is a documented pattern of concealment, unauthorized credit activity, and financial exploitation within a relationship built on partial truths. True hearts. If you've ever wondered whether people like Malachi actually get justice, lean in, tap like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes if you've ever prayed that one day someone in authority would finally call what happened to you by its real name. They broke it down point by point. The hidden card in his name. The inflated 12,000 that was really 98. The timing of accounts opened after the wedding. The personal ATM comments, and the confession that she'd wanted to be funded, not saved. The court finds, the judge said, that a portion of the debt incurred was done so through fraudulent or deceptive means. Mr. Rowe will not be held responsible for balances tied to accounts opened without his explicit consent. Malachi exhaled, a breath he felt like he'd been holding for years. Then came the part that put a number on it. Regarding funds already paid, the judge continued, the court orders reimbursement in the amount of $62,000, representing documented payments Mr. Rowe made toward debts that can be traced directly to Mrs. Harrow's unilateral spending and misrepresentation. Leona's head snapped up. 62, she started, but her own attorney touched her arm, a silent warning. Payment will be structured over time, the judge went on. Mrs. Harrow will have 6 months to begin repayment. Should she fail to comply with the agreed schedule, wage garnishment may be pursued under applicable law. The word garnishment hit the air like a cold wind. For once, Leona's eyes weren't on Malachi. They were on the future that suddenly looked smaller, heavier, real. The judge finished the rest with clinical precision. Divorce granted. No shared assets to split beyond what had already been eaten by debt. Clean separation from any accounts opened without his signature. To be clear, the judge said finally, looking at both of them, this ruling will not make either party entirely whole, but it will prevent Mr. Rowe from continuing to be financially punished for choices he did not make, and it places responsibility where it belongs. When it was over, there was no applause, no dramatic music, just the scrape of chairs and the shuffle of papers. Leona stayed seated a moment longer, staring at the table as if she could will the judgment back into the file. Malachi stood. His legs felt weak, but not from dread this time. From release. Renita shook his hand, her grip firm. This is as strong an outcome as the facts could support, she said. You did the hard part long before you walked into this room, documenting, enduring, and choosing to stop. As he walked out of the courtroom, the weight on his shoulders didn't vanish, but it changed. It wasn't the suffocating pressure of 5 jobs and hidden accounts anymore. It was the lighter, honest heaviness of starting over. His phone buzzed once in his pocket. A new message from an unknown number that he didn't need to open to understand the tone. He let it vibrate out, then silenced it. For the first time in a long time, the debt that mattered most, the invisible one, the one measured in sleep, trust, and years, wasn't growing anymore. It was finally, officially, being paid back. Malachi had folders full of evidence for the court. For himself, he needed something different. Pages that didn't track money, but meaning. A week after the judgment, the apartment felt unnaturally quiet. No lawyer calls, no court dates on the calendar. Just the echo of habits he no longer needed, checking balances, chasing overtime, scanning for new damage. He found the notebook in a discount bin on his way home from work. Plain cover, no quote on the front, just lined pages that smelled like new paper and second chances. He didn't buy it to be dramatic. He bought it because his head was loud, and he was tired of carrying everything in silence. True hearts, if you've ever survived something that almost rewired your idea of love, this part is for you. Tap like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes if you've ever needed to write things down just to prove to yourself you weren't crazy. On the first page, he didn't write her name. He wrote his. Malachi Rowe, then paused, pen hovering. For years, his name had mainly existed on bills, contracts, and applications he didn't fill out. Seeing it at the top of a blank page felt like reclaiming a signature he'd loaned out for too long. He didn't start with what she did. He started with what he'd learned. Lesson 1, he wrote, slow and deliberate. Not everyone deserves your sacrifice. Some people only deserve your boundaries. He let the words sit there, staring at them like a mirror. If he'd understood that sooner, maybe the story would have been shorter. But then again, without the full version, he might have doubted himself forever. Renita had given him a card on the way out of court. Consider talking to someone, she'd said. Not about her, about you. So he went. Not every week at first, money was still tight, but enough. He sat in a small room with soft chairs and a clock that ticked too loudly. And for once, when he talked about exhaustion, about being used, about feeling stupid for not seeing it sooner, nobody told him he was overreacting or being too sensitive. He started bringing the notebook to those sessions. On some pages, he wrote simple truths he'd forgotten. I am more than my income. Working hard is not the same as being loved. If someone mocks my effort, they don't deserve it. On other pages, he listed red flags he'd once explained away. The rushed mail runs, the soft, trust me, whenever he asked for exact numbers. The way we always meant him when it came to sacrifice, but me when it came to comfort. He wasn't writing to stay angry. He was writing so he wouldn't repeat the same story with a different face. Slowly, life shifted. He dropped one job, then another. He kept the warehouse, picked up fewer rides, started sleeping full nights instead of in parking lots. He learned what his laugh sounded like when it wasn't followed by a mental calculation of what everything cost. Some evenings, he'd sit by the window with the notebook open, not to write about pain, but about possibilities. What he wanted in a home that wasn't built on fear. What he wanted in a partner, if that ever happened again. Honesty that hurt early instead of lies that killed slowly. One entry, written after a long session, became his favorite. I will never again be grateful to be chosen by someone who only wanted what I could carry. By the time months passed, the payments from the judgment had started coming in. Not fast, not magically, but steadily. Every transfer was a reminder, not of her power, but of his decision to stop letting her write his future. He moved into a smaller place that he actually liked, picked out furniture not for one day when we have more, but for now. He cooked for himself, sometimes badly, sometimes well, and laughed at his own burnt toast mistakes because no one was there to judge how wasteful or basic he was being. On the last page of one section of the notebook, he wrote a line that sounded like a closing. I walked in as her provider. I'm walking out as my own man. He closed the cover, feeling, for the first time, like the story might finally be over. But even peace isn't safe from echoes. Because just when he thought the last loose end was tied, his phone lit up late one night with a notification he hadn't seen in a long time. An email from an address he recognized instantly. Subject line, "We need to talk." He stared at it for a long moment, thumb hovering. Then he reached for the notebook again, not to write about her, but to remind himself who he'd become since she lost. 1 year after the judgment, the email subject line, "We need to talk," didn't feel like a hook anymore. It felt like a test. Malachi stared at the screen for a full minute, the glow of his phone painting the room pale blue. He was in a different apartment now, smaller, cleaner, quiet in a way that didn't feel heavy. The notebook lay open on the coffee table, last page marked with the line he'd written weeks earlier. "I'm walking out as my own man." True hearts, if you're still here at episode 20, you already know what this moment means. Tap like, subscribe to Twisted Love Tales, and send your hypes if you've ever had someone try to walk back into a story you already finished for your own sanity. He opened the email. It was from Leona. No hi, no small talk, just paragraphs of familiar rhythm. "You didn't have to go that far. You ruined me in front of everyone. You made me look like a monster. I was hurting. We could have fixed it. You gave up on us." She ended with a line that made him pause, not because it was new, but because it was old in a different way. "You were always too sensitive. You made everything bigger than it had to be." A year ago, that would have sent him spiraling, checking his own memory, doubting his own reactions, wondering if he'd somehow imagined the red flags, the debt, the 4:47 a.m. call. Now, it just confirmed one thing. She hadn't changed. Not in the way that mattered. He didn't reply to the email. He closed it, set the phone down, and sat back, feeling his heartbeat slow instead of spike. The new place was nothing like the old apartment. No shared debt on the walls, no memories in the corners, just a small couch, a table with a plant he somehow kept alive, and a helmet hanging by the door, next to keys that jingled with something that still felt surreal. A motorcycle fob. It had taken him months of careful saving. No shortcuts this time, no 5-job madness. Just steady work, a budget that didn't bleed, and the stubborn belief that he was allowed to want something for himself again. The first time he rode the new bike, he pulled over halfway and just sat there, engine cooling beneath him, tears burning his eyes, not from sadness, but from a kind of quiet, almost shy joy. He wasn't escaping anymore. He was choosing. His therapist had smiled when he'd mentioned the bike. "Is this you running from something?" she'd asked. "Or riding toward someone?" He'd thought about it, then answered, "Neither. It's just me, finally moving for me." The notebook on his table was worn now, filled with lessons, promises to himself, and small victories. Paid rent on time without panic. Slept 8 hours, no nightmares. Laughed with coworkers without checking my phone for crisis messages. On one page, written after a long, honest session, he'd penned the line that would become his quiet motto. "Peace is expensive. I'm done paying for other people's chaos with my life." Weeks after the email, the final message didn't come in his inbox. It came as a text, sudden, short, like she couldn't let go without getting the last word. "You're pathetic," it read. "You threw away a woman who would have stood by you if you had gone broke. You were just too dramatic to see it. Enjoy your little freedom. No one else will ever do for you what I did." He sat with it for a moment, staring at the familiar cadence of guilt and ego spin. Then he scrolled back, not to old messages from her, but to a photo he'd taken 2 days earlier. Him, in his new apartment, a little tired but genuinely smiling, grease on his hands from adjusting the bike, a cheap takeout container on the table, no one judging him for it. For the first time, he felt no urge to defend himself. No need to explain. No itch to prove what really happened. He deleted the text without replying. No speech. No farewell. Just a quiet, deliberate act of choosing his own peace over her version of closure. He walked over to the mirror by the door, helmet in hand, and looked at himself. Same face, same tired eyes. But something different in the way his shoulders settled. Not weighed down. Grounded. "She called me pathetic," he said under his breath, almost testing the words. And then, slowly, a real smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I was just patient," he murmured. "Too patient. With the wrong person." He picked up his keys, feeling the fob press into his palm like a small, solid promise. "I'm not her ATM," he said, voice steady now. "I'm my own man." Then he stepped out into the open air, started the engine, and rode, not away from a wreckage, but forward into a life where his name, his time, and his heart finally belonged to the same person, himself.